All right, so good morning, everybody. This is the Des Moines Admin User Group. Let's get flowing. And my name is Terry. We've got Carla on the call as well as the co-leader. And we also have Michelle Hansen on the call. She is the user group leader in Cedar Rapids. She actually lives in St. Louis, but is still leading the Cedar Rapids user group. And I'll introduce her a little bit more later, but I'm super, super excited that she's with us today as well. And just a reminder, I do say to stay muted. I really don't care if you stay muted or not. If you have questions as we go through, feel free to ask those. If you're the shy type and you prefer to just put it in the chat window, we will be watching the chat window as well, and we will do our best to get your questions answered. Just a reminder, we are being recorded and this will be posted online. We do need to take attendance, so it looks like everybody's name is pretty clearly identified in our group, so that is helpful. If you are identified with just a first and last name, if you don't mind putting your last name in there, that might help Carla be able to identify who all is attending. So that would be helpful.
I think I've got everybody.
Did you get them all? Awesome. All right, so we've been doing the Let's Get Flowing. We've got 6 sessions that have been lined up. We've done 2 of those already, and this is our 3rd one that Michelle's going to be leading. And we are going to today show you how to create an AccountContact with a single screen. And just a reminder, these aren't necessarily practical use cases as much as they are use cases to help you learn. So I don't necessarily recommend you go out and implement this exactly the way we're showing it to you, but it's really designed more to help you kind of learn the various elements of flow. And hopefully that makes sense and will be helpful for you. So today our use case is we have an issue with user adoption, and the primary complaint is that it takes too many steps to add an AccountContact. And so we wanted to create a screen flow that allows us to capture basic AccountContact data. And in this particular flow, Michelle's going to walk us through the use of variables. And I'm sure she's got 1,000 best practices that she'll also share as we go through this. We have screens, we have assignment rules. We're going to create records. We're going to show you how to debug a flow as well as do some error fault tracking. And then we'll also run the flow toward the end of the process as well. And that screen doesn't need to be up there. And then our next training is on June 14th, and we'll be using login flows on that particular one, as well as taking advantage of some flow templates. And I'll be presenting that, so I'm sorry you're kind of stuck with me for next meeting. And that's all I have. Thanks for coming today. I'm going to stop sharing. And I was afraid of pushing some of those buttons. I'm afraid I'm going to hit the wrong one in the meeting for everybody. And Michelle is going to do our demonstration here today for you. And Michelle is just absolutely fantastic. And she has spoken at Dreamforce, I believe, 2 times now. She's spoke at Midwest Dreaming multiple times. All around very, very smart person, especially when it comes to flows. So if you've got questions on flows, she is an expert. I'm sure that she'd be happy to answer those as we go. So Michelle, with that, I'm going to shut up and let you take over.
Well, thank you. I don't know if expert is necessarily totally accurate, but I am a Flownatic and love them and have learned them quite well and love them. So I am more than happy to spread the flow love to the rest of the Ohana. And truly, if you have questions, I am always happy for you to reach out to me. I should have come prepared with like a bio slide so y'all could have my contact information. We'll see about fixing that before the end of the session. But as Terry mentioned, what we wanted to do is we wanted to go through a use case with you today to kind of teach you some of the criteria that go along with flows. This maybe isn't, like you said, the best use case. You could certainly probably tweak this a little bit and use it for easy account and contact creation, I actually use something very similar for custom object record creation along with a child object of that custom object. So instead of creating the first object and then having to go somewhere else and create the child object of it, since 60% of the information was the same, I put together a screen flow that says, give me all this information. And then, do you want to create the child record too? And if you say yes, it says, great, give me this other information. And this is all extra that I need. And I'll just go ahead and create both of them for you at the same time. So I'm actually really thrilled to tell you that it knocked down record creation time about 70% with my users. They were happy. They were very happy. And that's really what this is about. It's about making your users' lives easier, which makes them happy, and then they call you a rock star. So who doesn't like that? So, okay, we are going to build this together, but before we do that, I wanted to kind of just show you what we're going to end up building. And so this is going to be, for me, a fairly simple flow. If this looks a little intimidating for you, don't worry, we'll walk through it step by step. Essentially, we've got 3 types of elements, and if you look over here on the elements canvas, you can see an interaction is some action or interaction that's going to happen in your flow, and this is only available with screen flows. Then you have logic. These are things that you need to do to manipulate your data within the flow. I like to think of flow as a big empty desk. And then I start thinking about all of the records as files in a filing cabinet. And when I walk up to my big empty desk, there's literally nothing on it. So anything that I want to work on, I need to go get out of the filing cabinet and bring it over to that desk. And that's where these pink items come in. This is the action of going to the filing cabinet and either pulling out or putting in files or records. So it's kind of cool because Flow is kind of like a sandbox within your Salesforce. Nothing that you do within Flow actually has any impact on your org until you put a pink element on the canvas. When the pink is on the canvas is when it gets real. So we'll go through and we'll start working on that, but this is what we're basically going to shoot for. Okay, so to start, I'm going to go to setup and I'm going to go to the process automation. And since I don't care where anything is, I just start searching up here. And I'm going to go to flows and it's going to bring up the flow screen. So we have a few flows already in our org. We're going to go ahead and create a new flow. And if any of you guys are building along with me in a sandbox and I start going too fast, by all means, please tell me to slow down. If you have questions, I absolutely want to answer those. So this is pretty informal. I'm definitely not a formal type person. Okay, so we have lots of different options for what kind of flow we can use. And essentially the 2 kinds that are the most important in my mind, screen flows and auto launched. So screen flows means that you need some sort of input from your user. They have to be involved in this process. Auto launched, they cannot be involved in the process. So that's the biggest difference. If you want the user to be able to click something or give you information, screen flow is what we need. So that's what we are going to use today. Pretty much we're starting with a blank canvas. So this is our empty desk. So what is the first thing that we want to do? Well, we want to create an account. So I'm going to need some information. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and pull a screen element onto the canvas. So now I have a screen container and I need to start figuring out what we're going to put on here. So the first thing I need to do is I need to give it a label. So this is going to be account details. It's going to automatically fill in my API name. And I'm actually going to make some changes here. I'm going to label this with screen. Best practice while we're at it, have a naming convention for all of the different elements that you use. So when you're looking at things, you can easily tell what they are. Is this a screen? Is it a formula? Is it a variable? These are some that Terry has come up with. They're very similar to the ones that I came up with. I think our policy really is we don't care what it looks like as long as you have one. That's the important part. So all good admins would add a description. So this is where we collect account details. Actually, we're going to call this account and contact details because we're going to get both. Okay, so now I need to start pulling some information in. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to pull in a display text field down at the bottom, and you can also search up here for your different components if you know what you're looking for. So I'll show you that in a minute. So my first display text is just going to be called, it's a display text for account info. And so then here in this rich text editor, I can set what I actually want to have display. So in this case, I want account information. And let's jazz this up a little bit. So we're going to make it bold. And you know what? I'm going to underline it. And for funsies, I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. And I'll center it. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's the top thing on my page. The next thing I'm going to need is a name for my account. So to be able to do that, I just need a text field. So if I come in here and I start typing text, you'll be able to see the different elements that I can use in my flow. So this is kind of like when you're building a custom field. I just need a text. It doesn't need to be long, it doesn't need to be a paragraph, so I just want this to be a text box. Okay, so this I'm going to call account name. Now the label is what's going to display to your users. The API name, again, just like a custom field, is what the system looks at behind the scenes. So I'm actually going to change this a little bit. I'm going to call this input account name. So this also tells me that this requires input from the user. Also, I actually want this to be required. So I'm going to check that box. You'll see now there's a little asterisk. My users cannot skip this. You wouldn't want them to skip this when building an account, so it's a good thing to just have in there to be safe. Okay. Next, my account needs an address. So if I search for that, I can find the address component and drag this in. So you're going to notice right away that this looks a lot different from a components perspective than just a text box did. And this is because this has a lot of different attributes to it to actually be able to format correctly how an address lives in Salesforce. So you have an address field, but the address field is actually made up of the street, the city, the state, and the zip or postal code. And so this is actually helping us set this up correctly. So first things first, we need an API name. So input address. Okay, so now I need to start storing all of the different pieces in here. And so this is where we're going to start creating variables. Now there's two ways that you can create variables. So I'll show you my preferred way and then I'll show you the other way. Way number one, wherever you need that variable, if you click in here, you can always go into new resource. And by going into new resource, it's going to just pull up the variable creation right there. So from here, I'm going to select the resource type I need. It's a variable. So for variable, I use var underscore as my prefix. And I'm going to call this address city. And we're going to pretend I know how to spell while I'm on webinars, which is totally not true. Okay, so I have to decide what kind of variable this is. A variable is just a box. It's a box that you can hold stuff in, but you have to decide what you want to be able to put in that box. So for example, are you putting fruit in the box so the box can have holes? Are you putting liquid in the box? So it probably shouldn't be made of cardboard and definitely shouldn't have holes. That's where this data type comes in. And you can determine if it's a text type or a record or a number, currency. A Boolean just means true or false. So all of these different options that you have. Since we are putting in a city, that is text. That's what we're using here. Okay, so now that I have created that, you can see that it shows up in that city value right where I started creating it. Now the other option for how you can create a variable is to do it outside of this process. So we also need a country value and a postal code value. So what I can do is I can go ahead and hit done here so I don't lose anything. You don't want to hit cancel, that would not be good. And so what we can do is we can go over to our manager where all of our resources live. And these are things like our variables or our screen components. And I can add a new resource from here and it pulls up that same window. So I'm going to go ahead and just create really quick the state. And again, we're going to make this a text. And then I can actually create another one while I'm here. I'll go ahead and create postal code. And again, a postal code or a zip code is considered text, even though in the US they're all numbers. If you use a 6-digit number and called it a number field, it would input the commas for the thousands placeholders, which would look really weird in the middle of a zip code. So that's why we call it a text. Now you may notice down at the bottom, there are these 2 checkboxes for availability outside of the flow, and you can have it available for input and available for output. So because everything that we are working on happens inside our flow, it happens on this desk, we don't need to check either one of those boxes. But if you had a need to go ahead and maybe pull information from a record that you were on into your flow, then maybe that record ID is something you would want to pull in, and you would need to make that variable available for input. And that's something that basically, instead of you having to go to the filing cabinet and get it, it's more like somebody drops a file on your desk. So for them to have access to your desk, that variable needs to be available for input. Okay, so back to our regular screen programming here. So if we go back to our address, now if we start looking at some of the other options that we have here, the postal code value, I need to go and find the variable that I already created. And if you look here, you've got a list, and it's actually going to be sorted for you into kind of sublists. You've got global constants, so true, false, or empty string. Screen components, those are the things that we've actually placed on the screen. So this is our account info display. This is our input for account name. We're not done with this one yet, so it doesn't actually show up here. And then the variables that we created. So for this one, I think I'm setting on postal code. Yep, hey, look at that, I even got the right one. So we can do that. And then the other one, I did address state. So we'll go ahead and put that one in the state value.
So Michelle, we've got a question in the chat window for you.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you're using a state and country pick list?
Well, you don't, right? Honestly, I have never used those, but there is this actually really cool thing that you can do in Flow. And so while I have to build my country variable here, I will actually show this to you. So if you are using pick lists that exist in your org, and this is great if you basically are trying to help streamline creation for an object that already exists. Another resource type that you can use is called pick list choice set. And what this does is it allows you to reference an existing field on an existing object in your org and pull all of those pick list values into your flow for use with that particular field instead. So for using country or state pick lists, I would definitely recommend that you use the pick list choice set.
Yeah, and I would guess, and I don't know because I've not tried it, but I suspect that address component that we're using, you would not use. You'd probably end up using individual fields. You think that is a safe assumption, Michelle?
I'd say it's a reasonable assumption, and my general answer to that is try it both ways and see what happens.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, you're playing in a flow, especially in a flow in a sandbox. You're not going to hurt anything by trying. So
I think there are some implications there too with global value sets. I've run into issues with that. I don't know if they've addressed it yet, but.
Okay, I was just going to ask that, so thank you for bringing that up, Carl.
Yep.
All right, so once again, I'm creating a variable for the country part of the address that we're going to put in the country value. And then the last one I think I need is street. So we'll go ahead and create that one real quick as well. So, And a lot of times in description fields, I'll put what this variable is supposed to hold. If it does something elsewhere in the flow, I'll usually put that in there too. Like, why am I doing this? What is the point? Sometimes it's fairly obvious what something is. It's less obvious why something is. So the more you can put into that, the more your future self and future admins are absolutely going to appreciate and thank you. Okay, so we have now handled the input side of things. So basically this gives us some default values. We need to come down here to the output variables for this, and we need to set those same variables everywhere. So the city value, whatever gets input by the user, I want to assign to that city variable. Whatever they put in for country, I want to assign to country. Same thing with our postal code, our state or province. Since we're in the US, we just called it state, and our street value. So now that we have all of that done, we can move on to our next component. So the next thing that we've decided we want after we have our URL or our address is a URL. And so there is a URL component available that is going to help with the formatting to make sure it is a valid web address. Okay, so again, we're going to put an API name of input URL since this is something that we actually want users to fill out. URL, not necessarily everybody knows what that means, so we're going to call this website. Everybody knows what a website means. Okay, disabled global constant false means we want this to show on the page. Basically, if you wanted to put this in as something they could not change, you could enable this to true and it would display. Same thing with read only. And we can also make it required, which we're going to leave this as not required, which is totally fine. The value then, we can actually set a default URL. And so to be able to format a URL correctly, you have to have this http://. So that's why we put this in here as the value. So hopefully they will just start typing the www.somethingorother.com. So once we have all that, we have all of that set. Again, we need somewhere to store this. So we are going to store the value in a new resource. And anybody want to guess what we're going to call this? var_URL.
Nice and simple.
Yep. This is not a time to have creative fun with your naming conventions and make people guess what you're trying to do with every field and variable. All right, so again, we're going to make this a text type since we don't have anything that's specific for like a URL or a website. So that's what we want here. Okay, so we are doing good. We've got the basics that we need for our account, the name, the address, and a website or URL. So now I want some contact information. So again, I'm going to snag my display text so I can create a separate section now that's going to be for contact information. So it's a display field called contact information. And because I like consistency, I'm going to do all the same fun things that I did above so that this should look very similar. Just making sure I got all my font correct. Okay, so now what do we need to know about a contact? Well, the first thing that Terry told you about me is, shockingly enough, my name. Let's pull that in. Okay, you could also do this with a text field or two. But again, the name component pulls in some stuff to be able to format correctly because most names in Salesforce are actually two different fields, first name and last name. So input contact name is our API name. We're going to display the first name and the last name fields. If you wanted to, you could probably pull in middle initial or middle name, whatever field that you have here. And then again, we need to start creating our variables to hold everything. So we're using a lot of variables. You'll get used to this. Sometimes it's a little bit challenging because you have to remember that everything you want to manipulate needs its own box. So again, just making sure that we know what this is for. Data types for all of these, again, will be text. And then we'll do another variable for last name. Okay, we'll leave the rest of the items blank, but you do have the option for middle name and salutation if you wanted to have those, and suffix. So again, we've got the output section. So whatever they put in is what we want to assign to those variables. So I'm going to go find my first. And if you have a lot of variables, we've started to add a lot of stuff here, and this list can get kind of long. So if you start typing, it's going to reduce your list down to the ones you're looking for, and that will make it much easier to find the variables that you need to assign. Okay, so we've got our first and our last name for our name. So the next thing we know, any good contact, you want to be able to get a hold of them. So let's talk phone numbers. Okay, so let's give this a name of input contact phone. We can actually change the label, and we're going to call this contact phone because I want to make sure they know this is the phone number for the contact and not necessarily for the company. You do have the ability to set a pattern. This can get a little challenging because there's a lot of different ways that people pattern phone numbers. But what you can do to make it a little bit easier to read is you can put placeholder text. So I'm a big fan of putting the area code in parentheses and then having the NPA and then the NXX with a dash like that. So by putting placeholder text in, it's actually going to show in the phone number field like this so that someone can see how you want them to enter it. If you were working internationally, maybe instead you would want it to look something like +1 space like that. Assuming I actually know how to put plus signs as opposed to equal signs. But this is a more international format for numbers. So if that's what you needed it to look like so that people entered it correctly, you can help with some of that guidance on screen. But we're going to go back to old school United States phone numbers.
Is the placeholder text different than like a default value? Is it actually filling the field with that information, or is it kind of like a grayed out, this is what your information should look like?
Yeah, it's more of that grayed out look we'll see in a minute. Definitely it's not a default value because if nothing else gets put in this field, the field value is actually still blank. So that is an excellent question. You can put a default value in if we wanted, but that's not something that we want to do. So we can, however, make this required, and instead of being a required checkbox like we had on that account name, if you remember, now I need to enter something. So this is going to be basically a global constant. Is it true or false? Required needs to be true, so I'm going to grab this here and put that in. And then, as always, we need a variable. So again, we are going to choose a type of text because there is not one for phone specifically, and we don't want it with thousands, commas. So let's just call this variable phone. That was weird. Apparently there are gremlins typing on my keyboard. Okay, and then we'll set this as our output as well.
So for the quick question, Michelle, did you, for the address too, do we set a like output values and stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
So the output value section down here,
did that. Okay.
city, country, postal code, state, and street.
Sure, thanks.
So is everybody with us? Do I need to hang back for anyone to catch up, or are we good to keep going? I'm going to assume that silence means keep going.
I'm good.
Okay, so the last thing we need in the digital age, obviously, for a contact is an email address. So we're going to pull the email address component. Again, you could do this as a simple text field, but why would you want to when you can make sure that you've got something validating your entry for a legitimate email address? So input email. We'll leave the email label as email. That's pretty obvious. Again, placeholder text, making sure that you've got a correct sample in there. So u@example.com is exactly how we want this to look. And building our variable to hold the information. And once again, text is our variable type. And last but not least, we're going to go and make sure that we set email to our output variable for the value of this particular component. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit done, and because I am a paranoid person, it's time to save this thing. So the flow label is what's going to show on your list. So I'm going to call this 3A since we already have a 3. Create account and contact with one screen. So again, descriptions are good. Okay, the other reason that it's important to save is because there's a few things that happen when you save. Number one, you make sure you don't lose your changes. That's always the important part. Number two, it's going to do a check in the background to make sure that everything that you have done is going to function correctly. And so this is where some of these warnings come in. And so I'm going to notice that I have 3 warnings. 2 of them are just a heads up. Okay, that's pretty cool, but let's see what they are. So I have a couple of screen components that require Lightning runtime. We'll get into that. I also have one that is a major issue. I have not connected anything to my start element, so essentially I have not told my flow to do anything. Flow isn't going to run, it's not going to let you do anything, so I can't activate the flow. So this is always a good reminder to make sure that you've done things correctly. If you're building formulas and your syntax is wrong, it's going to yell at you here. They're actually trying to change that so it yells at you when you're building your formula in the future, which will be super helpful. But saving often, always a good idea. So I'm going to come back over here, and then from the little circle, if I click on it and drag, I get this line, and then I can connect it over to the box. It doesn't have to be right on top. It can be anywhere on the box to connect that line. If you have perfectionist tendencies, like many of us in the flow community do, you will spend 8 times longer actually straightening the lines to connect the boxes than you will building your flow at all. But since we have done that, I'm going to go ahead and resave it. It's also going to show me that I have 1 heads up warning now. So it's taking care of the one that prevented my activation. Now, part of the reason I wanted to do this now is also to show you a really cool feature called the debugger. With processes, you build a process, you have to activate it, then you have to go do whatever is supposed to make it fire for you to test it, which is super annoying because if it's wrong, then it's clone it, fix it, activate that one. How many versions of flow can you possibly have by the time you get it right? Well, that's why Process Builder stinks. No, I'm kidding. I like Process Builder just fine, but Flow is cooler. They give you the option to do debug. So if I click debug, it's going to run me through how this flow looks if it were running for real. Now here's the kicker. It's actually running for real. So anything I do right now, if I commit it to the database with a pink element, actually happens. So please, if you ever decide to do something, I'm going to term irresponsible, like build a flow in production and test it, you're going to be changing your production data. So please be warned, and please don't do that. Okay, so 2 things. Run the latest version of each flow called by subflow elements. So if you have versions that you have saved, whatever the most recent one is, even if it's not activated, is what it's going to look at. For the most part, you don't need to worry about these boxes, just leave them checked. But this is the important one that has to be checked. Show the details of what's executed and render the flow using the Lightning runtime. And because we have the elements that require Lightning runtime, we need to do this. And I want to actually see what's happening as we step through this. So I want this kind of running commentary. So if I hit run, the first thing that we did is we put up a screen. So that's what we're seeing now. And now I can actually see exactly what this looks like for my users, literally. This is going to be at the top of the screen in my header. It's going to have an account information section that looks exactly like this, my account name, my address with all of these placeholder fields in them, my contact information. So if I actually click on here, it does go away. So it is that grayed out placeholder text. Same thing here with my email address. But this I can basically make sure that I have it looking the way I want it to look. Everybody pretty much happy with this? Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that because we're just going to go back and keep reopening it as we resave. And every time you resave, you have to relaunch the debugger. Okay, so now we have created the screen to grab all of our information. Now, Terry and I realized as we went through this with several iterations that the happy path is super easy to follow. We love the happy path, but you have to figure out how to box your users in when they do stuff that doesn't work. So the next thing that we decided to add is a decision element. Because if they go through and they create the account and then they try and create the contact and they run into a problem like a duplicate rule or something, it goes back to the beginning and tries to recreate both, which is a problem because you can't have duplicate accounts. So we put together a decision that says, okay, did we actually already have the account created? So DESC for decision. And then the outcomes are basically how our logic branches. And so this is going to be super complicated. We have yes and no. So how do we know if it's yes? Well, we start making conditions. And so we're going to have a variable that we're going to create called account already created. All right, so this is going to be a yes, no. It's like a checkbox. So that's going to be that Boolean type. So I'm going to go ahead and assign that as my type with my created variable. And so if this box is checked equals to true, that's how I know the outcome should be yes. Okay, now the thing of it is what I haven't done is actually gone ahead and created anything. So we're going to do that now. And we're going to do this by pulling over those pink elements. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create the account. Now, again, it's a parentship, so the parents always have to be born first. So this is going to be create account. We're going to create one record. And we are going to use the separate resources from that screen to set all of the values for our fields. So the record that we're going to create is an account. So this is going to be a list of all of the objects that are in your org. So this is kind of cool. It already has all of the information about that object for you. So if you have any required fields, if you have any custom fields, they're already there. You don't have to tell Salesforce any of that. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and set, let's start with our address field since they came up first alphabetically. Don't click on things you're not supposed to in the middle of a demo. It doesn't go so well. So same thing here. If you know what you're looking for, instead of scrolling through them all, you can start typing and pull them in a little bit easier. You also have to spell them correctly, just as a little FYI. Okay, so we have all of our address fields, we have the name of the account, we have the website. So now we need to decide, this is the field I want to fill out, what do I want to put in it? Well, the billing city is going to become my city variable. And I'm going to do this for all of them. See, and you'll notice we didn't actually call this website. I called this URL, so you have to know what you named things elsewhere. So now basically I've said, create an account, make all of these fields on this account equal to everything that my user put in before. Simple enough, right? Okay, now we want to do one other thing. We need to create an assignment so that if we actually did create the account, we update that checkbox to true. So we're going to update account created variable. So I'm going to go find that variable that we have, account already created, and now I'm going to set it to true. So if it was false, which is its default state, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create the account. Once we've created the account, then we want to make sure that we set the variable value to true. So if we ever go back down this path again, it doesn't make it to this create element. Okay, so once we've done that, now we can go and create the contact record. So because they are different objects, we have to create them individually. Okay, so now we're going to create the contact. We're going to create one contact, and again, we're going to use all of the values that we have from the fields that we had input on that screen. Again, I'm going to go find the record I want, and so now I want contact. So again, if I start typing, it'll filter my list, and now I can start setting all my field values. Okay, so the first thing I need with the contact is I need to be able to associate it with an account. Then we also know we need the email address. We'll do first and last names here. They're going to want all the address fields, so we're going to leverage the fields that we have for the billing on the account to be the mailing here. Then we also asked for a phone number, so we'll make sure that we add that. And let's call that business phone. And so then we come back over here and we start assigning all of our variables. So this account ID, this is really interesting. How am I going to get that? Because we didn't have an account for me to be able to go look at and pull. The cool thing is that when you create a record in Salesforce, it automatically says, okay, I made this record now has an ID. I'm going to hold on to that in case you need it later. So if I come down here, I can actually find my create element somewhere. Okay, so and this is why I love to search. So under variable, I have one that was automatically created for me called my account ID from my create account. So this is what I named that create action, and it's pulling in an account ID for me. Everything else, I'm going to go ahead and pull from the screen variables. So my email, first and last name, okay, so we have all of our fields and we've assigned all of them values. Okay, so far we're going down the happy path. So now once we're done, the next thing that we want is we want a success message. Hey, good job guys, you did what you were supposed to. I'm always a big fan of success messages, so that way after whatever has happened happens, you can confirm that with the user and they're not left wondering what actually happened or am I done. Okay, so I need to actually label the screen, so SCRN for screen. And so then I'm going to put a display text on it, which is down here at the bottom. And we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. So now what I want to do is I actually want to put some fun stuff in here. I like fun things. So we are going to go and we are going to create something new. It's called a text template. So the text template can be created again from here like all your other resources, but a text template gives you the ability to pull in different information into a template that is with text. The reason I use this, I like pictures and GIFs and images and fun stuff like that. So text template, success message. Okay, So what I actually want to do is I want to put in some text that basically says, hey, good job, you did what you were supposed to. And I'm going to put it in green, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. It's all sorts of fun. And now I'm actually going to go snag an image. I also like to really use cat GIFs all the time. So that's just me. We put a little fun in our org. So now there's actually going to be this big done message that shows underneath this. And so this is why I've put it in a text template so that I can display this kind of image. And so that's then what I'm going to put in my display text element here. Okay, so we've gotten the happy path done. We like the happy path. Yay, these are all the good things that should happen in life. Now, here's the problem. How many of you guys have ever had your users do something they weren't supposed to? Right, nobody, ever. That never happens. So what we need to also do quickly is handle our fault paths. And so I've got everything connected, but you'll notice that there's still some of these options with circles, meaning that there's more connections that can be made. So number one, let me move a couple of these things. My straight lines don't work for me anymore. I'm going to move this down here underneath it, because if the account has already been created, I want to skip this one and go straight to the contact. So my no decision, I just did those backwards, hang on. So if it's already been created, skip it and go straight to the contact. If it has not been created, then go ahead and create the account first. There we go. This is why I always build in those last. So now I've been able to branch my logic from this decision. It's gone the 2 ways it needs to. I no longer have that little white circle there saying, hey, you can connect this to something else. Okay, so the other thing that we can do is we can put error messages and handle erroring for our users. So the first thing I am going to do is I'm going to create a couple of custom labels so that I can have these for use in all of my flows. Instead of writing the error message every single time, I come in here and I create a new custom label. And I can have an error. So anywhere I ever want to create an account in a flow and I have an error, I can pull this custom label in and use it. And so it basically just says the account name must be greater than 3 characters. This is tied to one of the validation rules we have on our account. So this means if I were to create an account for IBM, we're going to be in trouble. You actually need to use the real name, which is IBM Corp. So that is the nice thing about being able to use these, is they can also help you if you have any issues, because your validation rules do apply. So what I am going to do is I'm going to create an assignment, because if we have an issue with the account creation, that's what it's going to be in our scenario. And so now I need to assign that custom label to a variable to display if that is my error. So I'm going to assign account create error. Okay, so a new variable that I want to be able to use a couple of different places is called error message. Again, it's going to be a text variable. We're big on those today. And so now the error message needs to actually equal a formula. And the formula is how we are going to pull in that custom label. So now instead of going to variable under resource, we're going to go to formula. So FX is Terry's, mine is FML, which use what you want, FMLA, FX, whatever, so that you know it's a formula. And so formula to pull in the error text from the appropriate custom label. So to pull a custom label in, it's pretty easy. You go look at it and you can find this under your system variables at the very bottom. So if I go to label, it's going to give me an option for all of the custom labels that I've created, and this is my account one. So I can pull the text of that label in here with a formula, and that formula assigns it to that variable. So now that we have done that, I'm going to connect this here, and it's going to give me a fault path. So if everything goes well, it's going to follow the good line. If something goes wrong, it's going to follow the red line. And so then I'm going to add another screen to be able to tell my user what that error message is. And I know we're a little pressed for time here, so I'm going to try and pick up the pace just a bit. And so then what I will do is my display text then I'm going to go pull in my variable, which I'm going to do that up here. Okay. So then if that gets assigned, we do that. We can also do the same thing over here for our contact. So we're going to use the other error message that we have created. And so this time our error message that we created is going to be a formula to pull in the other one. So we'll create our formula. And this is going to be the state needs to have 2 digits. So we want to use the abbreviation. We don't want to use the full name of the state. So I go down to my label. This time I need my contact creation error. We'll put that in here. Now, whichever one of these I assign, I'm going to have it display on that same error page. But what displays will depend solely on which one of those 2 was assigned to that variable. So that's why we do it that way. Okay. And save. So again, we have one warning, but it's just a heads up. Again, it's that lightning runtime. No worries there. So do we want to quickly demo this, and do we want to go down happy path or unhappy path?
Let's demo it.
Happy path or unhappy path?
Happy.
All right.
Happy days.
Okay, so what we actually did with this is to put it somewhere useful. We added this as a list view button on the accounts list view. Now it's not accessible from the recently viewed, so keep that in mind. But on the all accounts list view button, I now have a new account and contact. So if I go ahead and click on this, it's going to pull up a new window with that flow screen. So we're going to call this Michelle's test account. Okay, and I got to make sure I use that one correctly. We'll give Terry a shout out for his tidbits because they are awesome.
Thank you.
We'll see if anybody in the crowd is old enough to know the phone number. Okay, so when I hit next, it's going to go through, it's going to create everything. It showed me my success screen. We went down the happy path. I get this big old green check mark done. So now if we go and we look at our accounts real quick, we're going to see Michelle's test account has been created. And if I dig into Michelle's test account, I can actually go and see my contact record that was created over here with all of the information that I entered into that form. So there, how's that for an hour's worth of learning?
It was good.
Any questions in our last couple minutes? Now, certainly if we went down the unhappy path, we would have seen the unhappy error message show up for either that state being incorrect or for the, what was it, the name of the account would have shown up as our error message, and we would have then gone back to our entry screen where we would have been able to correct the error. Any questions?
I guess the only things that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, where are you planning to post the recording?
It will be on that Terry's Tidbits site.
Okay.
There's a YouTube channel there. So terrystidbits.com/YouTube is your easiest way to get there.
Okay, sweet. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll throw this up in case anybody's interested in being able to get in touch. I definitely tweet more than I do LinkedIn, but I'm happy to connect either place. Just let me know where we met. Otherwise, I'm usually not very good about remembering where I ran into people that want to connect on LinkedIn. But truly, I mean it. If you've got any questions on Flow or you ever get stuck trying to build one, I'm more than happy to get on a screen share with you and we'll build it from scratch and we'll go through it step by step. One other resource I want to make sure that I shout out is this website. I'm going to snag the URL and throw it in a chat window, assuming I can figure out how to do that.
And one of our upcoming Flow sessions, we're going to be using some of the elements off of this particular site. So that'll be one that you'll want to certainly tune into as well.
Yep. So this is an unofficial website for Salesforce Flow that is basically run by the product manager of Flow at Salesforce. So it's not sanctioned by his job, but this is his job in his life. And he's gotten a lot of community members, including 2 or 3 new MVPs this last year, who have built all sorts of really cool things that you can then pull into your org and use in flows. So for example, one we didn't use today is navigate to S-object. So once you've created a record, you can actually navigate your user to that record that they just created with that particular action. Or there are ways for you to essentially build list views within Flow and then manipulate the records in that list view. So there's tons of these screen components, actions, other components. There's beginner tutorials if you want more on Flow here. Tons of blogs from different people. Jennifer Lee is really big. Rakesh Gupta and David Litton are the 2 co-hosts with her of Automation Hour that happens every other week, and they go through and they show a bunch of really cool solutions for use cases using automation of different types. But this is a really good resource for you to dig into and can really help you extend your flow and do some cool stuff with it. So Dave's taking care of writing the component for you once. All you have to do is plug it into your org and use it in Flow, and you don't have to be a developer to use the cool nifty tools.
Yeah. Very good stuff. So Michelle, thank you so much. You did a fantastic job, as I knew you would. She's excellent, guys. And so if you do have questions, gosh, I hope you don't blow her up by asking for too much of her time, but certainly, certainly reach out if you have questions. Also, do use our community site, because we have a lot of local people who are also very, very good with Flow that would be more than happy to try to help answer questions that you may have. So thank you all so much. Again, thank you, Michelle. And we will see you all hopefully next month at the next training.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, everybody. It was great. Glad to meet you all. Have a good day.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks,
Terry.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.